part 2, we left the little boy with the huge imagination in the bedroom. An imagination that would take 30 years to manifest itself in the form of literature. In those days, my daily routine was to take a walk and view the sights that was before me. Allowing my mind to be engulfed in thoughts and counsels and ideas that would formulate themselves into the written word. And I would there be met by a friend, Morris Art Dublin. He not only gave me encouragement in the pen, but also the pencil, where he imparted upon me the love of arts. We would counsel one another and befriend each other with words of kindness and care. And I suppose it is here we must leave that part and return to the little boy in the bedroom.
The colours of George's childhood imagination, born in that little bedroom, soon manifested on the streets and in the wild open fields of Finglas. Boyhood friends, George, Joseph, Pat, Bella, Wally and Thomas. City kids, their playground was carpeted in green, surrounded by tall trees, sunny days, horses on the banks of a river, fish swimming upstream, and a little boy looking back to the flats from which he came.
And before I ever wrote anything, I frequently wrote down or jotted down letters in my own mind, unpublished work on maps and art and all the things that I became friendly with in the secret place, in the solitary place of my own bedroom. Looking back as a child, I found that solitude, I suppose, became a companion as I began to try to understand the society in which I came from and the world in which I had belonged to. And I began to start, I suppose, in a sense, really thinking things through in depth, because I believed in my own heart that the only thing that would bring social change would be actually literature. Even as a kid, I could see that writing was the way forward, and I suppose it was a dream buried in my heart. And there's also a revelation of the kid when we read the particular chapter in the book that has been already stated in part 2 of the documentary. And it stated, I suppose, this way: the little boy in the bedroom. The central theme of the book, When We Were Kids, is about the little child who dreamed of becoming a writer. His mind was the pen that jotted down all he saw: houses, whitewashed walls, windows, doors, personal belongings hanging on lines, drifting at ease by a gentle wind in a neighbour's garden. Apple boxes, the fruit and veg man, the scent of soap and perfume, the protection of loving parents, the sheltering power where he resided in his make-believe childish world. My dad was a gentleman, my ma a lady. I never needed to see the face of a king or queen because I was blessed to see them every day. And as a man, I often walked back to the neighbourhood in which I came from and stood there, looking, conjuring up thoughts and ideas and trying, maybe, I suppose, to look for the little boy that was once me. And in the book When We Were Kids, on my last day in the flat of Ballymun, I stated sort of this way. I talk about leaving the flat and hearing the noise coming from the basement that sounded like friction of leather rubbing off the hard tiles. I heard heavy breathing that appeared to be coming from boys who were fighting. I listened with interest as I crept my way in. When I saw 2 boys fighting and I heard a wailing sound, it was coming from a small fat woman. She looked like a washerwoman dressed in an apron. The boys were gaunt in appearance, dressed in dirty clothes. Only bristles for hair. A middle-aged man. It was as long as a tree stood between them. He had a long coat and a cap. He looked very drunk. One of the boys slapped the man, and when he failed to get any response, he kicked the woman. The man fell to his knees. I thought he was going to say a prayer, but he cried instead. The heavy-set woman also wept bitterly. The man then rose and rushed towards one of the boys and lifted him so that his feet could not touch the ground. Then he walked him straight into a wall. My name came to me in a whisper. I turned sharply and saw Joseph. "Come on, man, Dad's looking for you. We have to go." So we backed out of the darkness and into the light.
The twins' introduction into the boxing world in the early 70s took place at the end of an era. In the rough and tumble of Dublin after the Second World War, the working class people became more interested than ever in the sport of boxing, and this was particularly true for those who lived in the tenement streets of Dublin's inner city. The inner city kids of the last century played on the streets of what had been some of Europe's most squalid slums. These neighbourhoods had always been closely linked with crime that came from poverty. Crime for many was not only a way of life, but a code of survival. They had always been at the mercy of cruel landlords and careless government, and employers that could only be called taskmasters. Boxing in the tenement world, for many a young boy, became a beacon of light.
Boxing originally came to this country as an Englishman's sport, a gentleman's sport. But after the war in 1945, it became very popular among the working classes within the inner city of Dublin, and hence boxing clubs began to start originating there in like the basement of tenement houses. But during the 1930s, the likes of, say, for example, Ballymun, which would have been a stud farm, a lot of horses and things would have been out there. The authorities, due to the fact of lack of housing, took over this particular area, and they had plans to develop it into more of a suburb, and the likes of Finglas East, and then eventually Finglas West and Cabra, Crumlin, areas like that. And when the working class people moved out to these particular suburban areas, they then took with them the sport of boxing and set up boxing clubs within these particular areas. And hence the boxing that went from moving from the inner city out into the suburban areas, where every area had its own sort of boxing club. Even in the likes of the 1970s, you had the development of Finglas South, but also Tala. Tala would have been like a little village, and then within the 1970s, the corporation began to develop it. And after a short period of time, they opened up St Mary's Boxing Club up in Tala.
In a very short time, the national papers were focusing their attention on the twins, with headlines such as "Brothers Reach Finals." In an unusual turn of events, 3 different pairs of brothers met in the final in the National Stadium. These were the Sutcliffe brothers, the Fitzgeralds and the Carruths. By the toss of a coin, George and Michael each won yet another boxing title. Michael Carruth would go on to win a gold medal in the Olympics.
Teach a child the way to go when he's older. He will not stray from the path. The toss of a coin and the applause of men, the twins, named among the great historical figures of Irish amateur boxing, such as the Carruths and the Sutcliffes. Phil Sutcliffe will take medals home from Europe, and Michael Carruth will snatch the gold from the Olympics, and the little boys from Finglas standing among them. The story began for me in a back lane in Finglas in 1974, and in the book Somebody Up There Likes Me Too, which later became When We Are Kids, it stated this way, as I had an encounter with a kid called Snooker Ball. Snooker Ball was a child of the streets. He dismayed all authority, never liked to trust anybody. I remember the winter's morning, I saw this boy smash the bottom window of his mother's house. I stared at him from the shadows. His mother chased after him with a rolling pin in her hand. She was thin and impoverished looking. Even as a kid I could see that. Snooker Ball had already seen the inside of a reform school. A career that would take him to the big house and would eventually lead him to the capital crime of murder. But for now, he wasn't the state's problem, he was mine. The lapping sound of the streets pervaded the air with laughing children and music that came from the open windows. But I was drawn away, cold as it was, to focus on the shoe-shine boy who carried a blade. Snooker Ball locked his eyes upon me, and on the wall he grabbed me, snatched me, fired me to the ground. He picked me up and shook me violently. I dropped the money I had. Our tight embrace shattered. It was Sausage, a little kid my own age who lived down the block. Suddenly an army of kids rushed past, shouting, Davy had been hit with an axe. Davy had been hit with an axe. And he did. And as he grew up, Davy would kill 2 people. Snooker Ball will become a murderer and spend the best part of his life behind bars. But the boy will become a man, and his naked body will swing lifelessly against the wall. See, Kojak didn't walk these streets, but the gangs in New York did. They just had a different name.